Live from the McNeil International Film Studios in beautiful Baja Tustin. It is me, the PR manager for H1N1, reminding you that the swine flu wasn't that bad. And here to teach you about economics is Professor Mark McNeil.
Oh wow. What was that? I think we may have found Bigfoot. Wow. Alright, well, after that I have a hard time. Circular flow diagram. This is the macro circular flow because we've got all four sectors. There's another video in the micro section that deals with a simple circular flow. But this is the circular flow for macro. And it plays into how we count GDP. So this is a precursor for the counting of GDP. So we'll start with the basic 2 by 2 by 2. So in this basic circular flow, we have two sectors, the households and firms. Households are assumed to own all factors of production or resources. Households are consuming units. Firms are businesses and they are producing units. So in this basic layout, we have the households, they own all the resources. What land, labor, capital, and entrepreneurship, of which labor is the most important, it's the largest, and households receive their income from the sale of resources. So households have the resources. What do the households do with the resources? And the answer is they take them to the resource or factor markets. And there's a market for every kind of resource, for every kind of nut, bolt, every kind of oil, every kind of labor, for carpenters versus plumbers versus physicians versus surgeons versus, these are all markets. In each of these markets there's a supply and a demand, and a price comes out of it, and the price reflects the scarcity of these resources. So the households take their resources to these resource markets and they participate in whichever one kind of resource they have, and they sell the resources, and the resources go to the firms. So when you sell your labor resources, you get the money, but then you go to the firm and you're used in the production of whatever that firm is producing, a good or a service. Firms then use those resources to produce goods and services, and they send those goods or services to the product markets, the goods and services markets. And there is a market for every kind of good. There's a car market and a bus market and an apple market and a peach market and a market for every kind of good or service. And that's where the prices come out of the goods and services, and those prices reflect the scarcity of each of these goods and services. And what happens then to the goods and services? They go back to the households where they are consumed. So the goods and services go back to the households. And this is the basic circular flow. But it turns out that there are two flows. There's the real flow, that is the one you just saw, with real resources and real goods and services, real products. And then there is the money flow. So when firms buy resources from households, they send money back to the households, and this is household income. Household income. And what do the households do with the money? Generally speaking, they sell it. Now, in fact, they save a little bit, they pay taxes, and they buy foreign goods, but generally speaking, they buy things with it. And when they buy things, as these products are coming to the households are sending money back to the firms, and the money that comes back to the firms reflects the value of the goods that are produced and sold by the firms. So this is a simple 2 by 2 by 2 circular flow. However, we have to make it more realistic in macro, and there are two other sectors besides households and firms. The two other sectors are government and the foreign sector. So it turns out that there are, as the income comes into the households, there are leakages out of this income flow. The first leakage, try and imagine, if you live in where I live, try and imagine savings. It is common, not here, but it is common for people to save money. The second, and so the money that is saved doesn't get back up into the purchase of goods and services. The second leakage is taxes. And if you live where I live, there's plenty of those. And then the third one is some of the money that the households spend on goods and services is in fact spent on U.S. imports. And that money doesn't get back up into our circular flow, it goes off to somebody else's circular flow. So the question then is, what happens to the money that goes into savings? Well, the answer is, it is put into what are called financial intermediaries. Financial intermediaries are like banks. It's where people put their money. Insurance, mutual funds, that sort of thing. And these people take money in from net savers, and what do they do with it? They lend it to net borrowers. So the money from the savings that goes into these financial intermediaries comes back in, and it is used to purchase things that firms are producing. So that's the first leakage. The second is taxes, and taxes goes to the big gov. Now, does the government spend the money? The government spends the money, and it spends more than it takes in if it's the federal government. And so the money that comes out of this income stream in the form of taxes goes to the governments, and the governments then spend money as well. I should be doing this in green. And finally, imports. When imports leave the circular flow because the money is going somewhere to some other country, it goes to the foreign exchange markets. Foreign exchange markets. These are the markets where one currency is exchanged for another. And why do people exchange currencies? Well, it's because they want to buy another currency from another country so that they can buy that country's goods or services. So the foreign exchange markets are where dollars are exchanged for some other currencies, which we'll call SOC. So that money gets back up, and why do people want to buy dollars? So that they can buy U.S. goods that are produced by firms. So the leakages are savings, taxes, and imports, and they all go someplace that causes them to come back into the spending stream as injections. So the first injection comes from the financial intermediaries that lend the money to the governments and also to firms. So the money goes to firms so that firms can take the money and buy from other firms in the form of investment spending. So that's the first injection. It's investment, and its source is savings. The second is from government, and governments take the money and they spend it on things. Governments buy everything that firms produce, and so this money comes back into the circular flow where governments buy things that firms are producing in the form of government spending. And finally, the imports that we buy, the money goes to the foreign exchange markets, and people buy those dollars so that they can come back and buy U.S. produced goods in the form of U.S. exports. So we have three leakages: savings, taxes, and imports, and they are compensated for by the four injections. That is investment, government spending, and U.S. exports. So in order for this circular flow to be in balance, the sum of these leakages out of the income stream must equal the sum of the injections coming back into the income stream. Otherwise, we get inventory changes and upward or downward spirals. So equilibrium only exists if the sum of the leakages is equal to the sum of the injections. They don't have to be one-to-one equal. Otherwise, we have spirals. Okay, there's a crucial equality here that you have to understand. And that is that the value of the goods that are produced and sold by firms. So part of this is from, I failed to mention this, is consumption spending. Consumption spending is done by households on consumer goods. So we have the consumption spending, then we have investment. And the point is that all of the spending on the stuff that firms produce is known as national product. The value of the goods produced is national product. Now, from the production of these goods, firms have to buy the resources. They have to buy land, labor, capital, and entrepreneurship, and they have to pay for them. The payment to land resources is rent, to wages is capital, to labor is wages, to investment is capital, and to entrepreneurial resource is profit. So all of these payments to these resources in the resource markets come back to the households in the form of income. And the value of the national income must be equal to the value of the national product. Those two things have to be equal. Because anything that uses resources, the resources have to be paid. So that's an important equality there. You just have to remember that. When we measure gross domestic product, remember the circular flow business is an attempt to set up measuring GDP. And when we measure GDP, we measure it in both places. We measure it here as goods are produced and sold by firms, the value of the production that is sold to households in consumption, businesses in investment, government spending, and exports. The value of this is measured, and then the value of income coming back into households is measured by GDP statisticians, and then they compare them to try and see how close they are. Anyway, that's the circular flow. It's a setup for measuring GDP. That's the next big one that's coming your way. And I'll talk to you next time. I'm going to go look for Sasquatch right now.